There are two cages. One, the system built around you, and one you built yourself to survive inside the system. And the second one is harder to leave. The golden cage feeling is when you have everything you're supposed to want. The career, the credentials, the relationship, the apartment, the life that looks right from the outside. But underneath all of it, there's this quiet feeling of being trapped. And the reason it's hard to talk about it is that from the outside, it looks like success, but from the inside, it feels like ingratitude. So most people never name it. But today we're going to name it, and we're going to go deeper than just naming the feeling. We're going to understand exactly who built the cage, how you ended up reinforcing it yourself, and what it actually looks like to leave both cages. At the end of the day, a golden cage is still a cage. It's just decorated to look like your dream, but it's the dream that you've been conditioned to think is your dream. The system is made up of institutions and structures that were designed to keep the ceiling where it is. So you can talk about different systems that were put in place: patriarchy, capitalism, colonialism, and this is the architecture behind the cage. So depending on who you are, where you're based, your gender, and many other intersectionalities, the architecture might be even more reinforced. And the external cage looks like in real life that job that pays you well, but there's a ceiling because at the end of the day, you're making money and you're working hours in exchange of money for someone else or for something else. So it could also be that institution that is idealized or equated with prestige, like the UN, that you're going to be invited there, but you're going to be used as a diversity token. But for a lot of people, it looks like success. I have so much beef with UN influencers that sell this dream of what the UN is and that invite young people to work towards this dream. I was one of those people that dreamt of working at the UN and thinking that this is where you change the world. But the UN is also built on the very same system of colonialism with P5 structures and only a few countries deciding what a war deserved to be called and what wars deserve to keep going. And so this cage was not built by accident. It was built deliberately by specific people for specific reasons, the OG colonizers, to keep productivity flowing, to keep power concentrated, and to keep you working hard inside a structure that was designed to protect itself first, and working for others to make them richer while you're just there surviving, maybe paycheck to paycheck, and maybe you're just waiting for the weekend or you're waiting for whenever you get vacation time. The thing about the institution and the system at large is that it protects itself, not you. And it's not a malfunction. It has been made by design to keep you stuck into a system where you will never be enough, where you will never get higher than the most senior and elite people because most of them are white, cis men. And if you're not that, sorry to break it to you, might be harder or impossible to get there. I mean, even the UN has never had a woman secretary general. But even if we do have a woman secretary general, which is very likely to happen because the UN is literally like crumbling, and it's known that women inherit from institutions that are crumbling to fix them. Because that's how the world is set. Men wage war, women protect the world and sustain peace. So, so this external cage is the system. The capital is the system. It could be corporations. It could be the media. It could be international organizations. It could be anything that has been set decades ago under a world order that is no longer fit and that is no longer working with the current world order. And I think that within the past few years, a lot of people have awakened and have realized with the genocide in Palestine, for example, how the system is completely flawed. completely broken in a way that is broken by design to keep us all stuck, to keep us all hustling and surviving and not looking beyond and not opening our minds and seeing what's beyond the realm of possibilities that have been constrained upon us. So because we have been conditioned to think a certain way inside of this golden cage of the system, the hardest parts and the one that most people skip is that you can understand the external cage completely and still not leave. Because while you're living inside, you're built a second cage out of everything you absorbed there. And I was there too because I went from working in the humanitarian field to the UN, feminist space, and every single time I kept going, I saw the exact same institutional limitations and barriers repeating themselves differently in a different way. But even like being an NGO founder and leading a feminist or youth led organization, you still rely on the system to survive, except if you build alternative funding mechanisms. But you would rely on donors, on funders, on governments, on whoever would be willing to fund you. And that comes with a lot of agenda, that comes with a lot of constraints, a lot of limitations. You're limited constantly by the system. But if you think of making and building your own ways of generating income without relying on the system, then that's a big plus. But this internal cage that we've built is overproving ourselves, measuring our worth by output, shrinking to fit rooms that were not built for us. If you go to the UN, are you going to speak like yourself, or are you going to try to fit the agenda and speak the language of neutrality and diplomacy? Because every single time that I spoke there and I disrupted, I received a lot of backlash because I was outside of the system. I was disrupting the system. We always need permission before you're able to move or make decisions. You say yes even if you mean no. You perform instead of living. It's a toxic cycle that keeps repeating itself. There's also this version of ourselves that we're constantly over preparing, we're constantly measuring our value by how indispensable we could make ourselves. We keep pushing inside institutions, waiting for them to finally confirm that you're enough. And that's what happened to me. I kept pushing and wanting change and wanting to see change. I would receive claps. Everyone would clap. Everyone would tell me, you're so inspiring, you're brave, you're outspoken behind the scenes. But do you think that anyone would be willing to sacrifice themselves and to speak up the way I did? No. And when I moved to Lisbon a few months ago, I thought that I was leaving the cage. And in some ways, I had, because I decided to quit any roles that I had, including even from leading my own organizations. I needed to reevaluate everything. But I noticed that I brought so many of the internal bars of the cage with me. The urgency, the proving, the inability to just receive what I had already built without immediately looking for the next thing to justify my existence. I can't even tell you how many professional experiences, fellowship, degrees, certificates I have. Every single time I thought, if I have one more, I'll be enough. If I have this award, I'll finally be respected. And I literally collected these. But I realized that I was empty. It was not bringing anything to me. And I just kept on looking for the next one. So this internal cage does not necessarily dissolve when you change your postcode or when you leave a field of expertise to another. It has to be actively dismantled. The work that nobody tells you is waiting on the other side of leaving. And this is the shedding part, the hardest part of the work, to realize that we were conditioned to think in a certain way, to fit the system, while we can very well thrive instead of surviving outside of it. The external cage was built by the system. The internal cage was built by you, trying to survive inside of it. And this is just what us as humans we do, we adapt. It's not your fault, neither is your fault, both are yours to walk out of. And the thing about the cages is that they reinforce each other. The external cage tells you that your worth is in your productivity, your credentials, your output. And the internal cage internalizes that message until it becomes your own voice and not the system's voice. So you stop needing the system to tell you to shrink and you do it yourself. And this is exactly what makes the golden cage so effective, because it recruits you into maintaining it. You start policing your own ambition. You manage your own expectations. You negotiate yourself downward before anyone else has the chance to. And of course, there's also a huge role of society. The who do you think you are type of energy, the people in your own community who are most uncomfortable with your expansion, the cultural expectations that frame ambition as selfish or visibility as arrogance, rest as laziness, celebrating yourself as being egocentric. Those are all things that I also have faced in my journey, which made leaving the cage also harder. Because I would celebrate myself, people say she's full of herself. I would talk about my wins and accomplishments, and people would think that I'm pretentious, or that or that they will try to break me with words, with online attacks, and that don't deserve where I got, etc. The most sophisticated thing about the golden cage is that eventually you stop needing anyone to lock the door, and you do it yourself. So it could feel like you're always performing, you're not being, you're doing. You're not being a human being, you're being a human doing. You feel guilty when you rest, your nervous system is all over the place. You qualify every achievement with, but I still need to do something else or add something else. You're constantly waiting for permission that never comes. You confuse the cage with your personality because it's not your personality, it's just the most repeated version of yourself, and you can and you should break free from that. When it comes to your body, because the body keeps the score, the body gives you signs, the body knows before you know yourself, especially women. You have chronic exhaustion. It's not fixed by resting. There's this low feeling of not fight right, even when things look fine from the outside. This feeling of being watched even when you're alone, that you constantly have to do more and perform. And I want to ask you something, and think about that. When was the last time you did something purely because you wanted to? There's no audience, no narrative, no productivity attached to it. And if you cannot answer that, it's information. I spent weeks isolated without social media, on my own, just sitting with my thoughts, sometimes for days, looking at the wall, to shed and to deconstruct the version of myself I had created in my head because of the system I was in, that I tried to survive in. And eventually I realized I was free and I could leave, and I started leaving the system, institutions. I don't want to give my time to institutions that don't deserve it. I created this viral hashtag, no payment, no Yasmina, where I constantly spoke about the need to fight to be valued, to be compensated, and that I would never accept unpaid opportunities from institutions that have millions of dollars in budget. And a lot of people resonated with that, young people, women of color, because too often we're seen as charity case, and that we have to do this for the love of the cause, and especially activists, and that you're not supposed to make money from being an activist, but that's wrong. So I fought a lot the system inside, and I found ways around it, and I generated really good income. In the past, I would say 3, 4 years, I made over 6 figures every year as an activist. And I know that they don't talk a lot about money, but you should talk about money, and you should be compensated for every single thing you do inside the system, to say the least. Leave and break free from this golden cage. First of all, you need to see it clearly. You can't leave what you can't name. You need to build your own power map. You need to have strong foundation, and you need to understand that the external cage is the first step to not internalizing it as personal failure. And we need to stop glamorizing institutions that would never step for you if anything would happen to you or for your people, because we've seen that repeatedly. Then you also need to name your bars. Get specific about what the internal cage is made of for you personally. Your specific patterns. The thing you do when you feel unsafe, the way you make yourself small in certain rooms, the belief underneath the behavior. Write it down. Lastly, build your own cage outside of the bars. One thing that does not depend on an institution, a structure, or a version of success that was handed to you. Something that started from your own question of what you'd build if the ceiling didn't exist. And this is what I'm doing with this podcast and my Substack essays. Because that one thing is where the new identity lives. You need to start acting like your new identity. A cage you can see is a cage you can leave. Both of these cages are real. Both were built for specific reason, to control, to enrich, for greed, for power, for money. And neither is a reflection of your worth. And a cage you can see is a cage you can leave. I wrote a Substack essay on that, so I invite you to also go read it if you like to read. And before we end, I want to ask you, which cage are you most aware of right now? The external one that the system built, or the internal one you built to survive inside of it? And at the end of the day, remember that you were not born in a cage. You were born free, and that is still true. More power to you.